Hello and welcome to More Than a Lumpy Jumper, the podcast where we explore leadership, life and the bits that often get left out of the tidy LinkedIn version. Today we're talking about something that every leader faces but few like to admit: when they don't know. 3 simple words, I don't know, that can feel impossibly hard to say, especially when you're the one others are looking to for certainty, clarity and answers. So why is this so uncomfortable? And what happens when we fake it? And how can we learn to name the unknown to build better trust? And how do we get better at doing it without spiralling into self-doubt? So join us for being okay not knowing. I don't know who you are. Who are you?
I don't know either most times. I don't even know what day of the week it is most times.
Did you think I was to myself?
I love
rather than
I love this one because I think I've made my career on not really knowing what the hell I'm doing. And so I think that this is super powerful.
Brilliant. So I'm going to let you start. Where do you want to start with this one?
Well, so I'm going to start solely with this because it tickled me when I was having a look around at some things. And obviously I'm going to bring in a little bit of Sir Simon Sinek just because,
Of course.
I have to. But as I was sort of scooching around and looking at various things that might be useful for people and also for me to have something to talk about, I found another acronym. So we've talked about VUCA quite a lot just because it's one of my new favorite acronyms. But I found one that I might love even more. And so obviously VUCA means volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous. And everyone sort of says, yeah, we're all VUCA now. But I found BANI, and I don't know if you've heard of this one, which is brittle, anxious, non-linear and incomprehensible, which actually I think often is much more appropriate for kind of where I am and what I'm working in. So when I saw that, I was like, okay, that's it. That's all I'm going to talk about now.
Say it again. BANI. So brittle, anxious, non-comprehensible.
Brittle, anxious, non-linear and incomprehensible.
I conflated 2 of them. Incomprehensible and non-linear. I love that. In this BANI world.
Yes. And so this kind of idea of incomprehensible then tickled me a little bit because, I saw something recently about Gen Z are rejecting leadership roles. They don't want to be boss. They don't want to be leaders. And I haven't really, and probably should have done if I was going to talk about it, looked into it a little bit more. But it just struck me that a lot of people I've met are a bit like, oh no, I don't want to be in charge because I'd have to know everything and I don't know everything. So I can't really be a leader. And we hark back to this sort of old, I'm not going to say old fashioned, but maybe I am, way of looking at leadership as the all-knowing, all-powerful man in a suit stood on a pedestal that everyone looks up to and aspires to be. I kind of look back and think, have I ever met a leader who knew everything, who knew all the answers? And I just don't think that's realistic. And I think that maybe people have given the impression or pretended, but then I look at people who I have looked up to as I've come in through my leadership journey, and they've always been people who have been confident enough to say, I don't know. And then what does that mean when a leader says, not in a, oh my God, I don't know, everything's just falling apart, but confidently. So Simon Sinek has got a really short video, which I'll post, which is effectively that, saying that one of the most powerful things you can do as a leader is confidently say, I don't know, and confidently ask for help. And that, I think that, we have to precursor that because there's no point having a leader who literally is standing there going, I don't fucking know, I'm just everything is to, I don't know. But actually, if you turn around and go, I don't know the answer to this, but I'm luckily I'm surrounded by people who are, were recruited because of their great, amazing skill sets, their amazing talents, their amazing knowledge. And between us, we will all be able to come up with the answer. Or, I know that you particularly have this skill set. How about we talk about this? Maybe you can give us some answers. And then again, we were both in Royal Signals, right? And so, as troop commanders, we were surrounded by some very, very, very clever, experienced, and technically knowledgeable
Thank
soldiers
God.
who knew more wiggly amp
Yeah.
stuff than either of us. And it would have been, it would have been nigh on impossible to pretend that we knew how some wiggly amp thing worked. And it would have been stupid of us to not go, Sergeant so and so, you know how this works. How about you
But
tell us?
this is back to the old fashioned, and I am going to say the old fashioned or traditional route, because, hell, and who knew what the driver for it was, but my boss wanted me to be able to talk wiggly amp, which was never going to happen in a million years. And so I was set up to fail, basically, because I couldn't do that. And I think we were talking in our episode about being the weave and how hierarchy can get in the way of that if you're going to be saying you can't come into a meeting because you're not senior enough, so that you lose that. And this organisation that I was talking about that wouldn't let people, particularly, certain people into the room because they weren't allowed in that meeting because of their level of seniority, they equally have an expectation that their executive management team can answer all of the questions for all of the operational detail in their area. It's impossible. And when people and leaders try to do that, that is when things get fucked up.
Yeah. And you say that you were being set up to fail, but also you're setting everyone else up to fail, because I think that when a leader doesn't have all the answers, it creates space for the amazing, talented people in the team, all of whom have this amazing diversity of knowledge, experience, ideas. It gives them space to be able to create things and to be able to be flexible, to be able to take initiative, to be able to deal with VUCA, BANI environments, which I think if the leader is, okay, this is where we're going, I know the way, everyone follow me, absolutely do not deviate from the footsteps that I am walking in, then where is the adventure? And I know I say that a lot because I quite like the adventure, but where is the initiative? Where is the flexibility? So then leader, or if it's me with my map, follow me, chaps. I take my convoy the wrong way and end up lodging a ptarmigan switch under a bridge in a German village on a one-way street.
Or in a German zoo car park. We'll come on to that.
What?
That's
okay. I was going to say that wasn't me.
No, that was me.
I'm sure that wasn't me. Okay, this is a Bobby story, right? But so then what happens? Because if you've taken up all of the creative space and the decision-making space and the problem-solving space, then also you infantilize everyone else. Nobody gets to use that part of their brain. So when you actually then go, oh shit, actually, folks, there's a big truck lodged under a bridge, then everyone's so used to you being in charge that they don't feel that they can or aren't used to it. Luckily for me, my soldiers were like, oh, just kind of roll their eyes, and as I suddenly go into a mild panic, then show me that actually you just have to let the tires down a little bit and unlodge it. We're not doing the embarrassing shit of you having to guide everyone else backwards as a whole German village is watching us look like a load of idiots. You can do that bit, ma'am, but we'll get the truck out from wedged under the bridge. So yeah, for me, it's very much a lesson learned. Don't take up all the space. And I was lucky that I hadn't taken up so much space that there wasn't still the space for my team to turn around and get me out of that jam, that literal jam. So tell me about your zoo, Bobby.
Well, it's just because I do want to talk about the military, but I wasn't planning on talking about it. But this is just because I was shit at map reading. Completely shit at map reading. I'd never driven. I didn't drive at the time. Did I drive at the time? Who knows? But really didn't understand the autobahn, so thought I was coming off the autobahn, but was actually heading 27 vehicles straight into a German zoo car park and completely gridlocked the whole thing. And of course, big vehicles trying to all manoeuvre themselves round. And so we were then late for the next checkpoint, and I had to explain it to the regimental sergeant major, who went utterly apeshit. And I said, well, you shouldn't have given me the fucking map then, should you? And so then I got told off for, you know, not being very courteous to the RSM. But it's a similar story, because that one was, I didn't have the skill set. But again, this level of whatever the hierarchy was sort of like stipulated that I was leading the convoy and I should have had the map. I should never be given a map in a million years. I think my brother once sent me a Christmas card with Santa on the front, with Rudolph sort of like propped up against the sledge and Santa's looking at the map. And he said, mate, just accept the fact that you couldn't find your arse in the bath. And I'm like, yeah, that's absolutely the case for me, map reading. Anyway, but we do digress. I did want to bring in the military, because we're talking about traditional ways where did leaders in the past always need to know everything? And so it got me thinking about, well, and so I'm going to say a little bit about military doctrine actually, because I'm thinking you can't possibly have all of the answers during a war or whilst you're on operations. There's that decisive nature. And I remember us being in conversations, isn't it, about, you know, there are moments in time where you to tell your soldiers to jump and they just jump. They're not asking questions about it. They're just doing it because of the nature of the environment that you're actually, or the event that you're actually in. And then there are other times where, not necessarily questioning, but that, you know, when you're back in camp and you're not in any level of fog of war or whatever it is, what's that like? So it got me thinking about it. So I went and did a bit of digging. And I think that it's worth just making a note of all of this. I would say that because I'm about to say it, but I think it's worthwhile because it then takes us in, well, how do we play that out in slightly more normal environments in work and organisations by bringing in a level of uncertainty and I don't know, which we know that we live in all of the time. So this is what I found, and it does actually say that leaders in the military are not trained to eliminate uncertainty, because that's impossible, as we are aware, but to navigate it with clarity, decisiveness and adaptability. And so military doctrine actually explicitly states that perfect information is rare. I don't think you ever get perfect information, right? Because you give it some level of contact with a human being and they'll look at the information and they'll say, so, you know, there's nothing that there's perfect about that. And so that leaders are trained to operate despite incomplete, evolving or conflicting information and still can make timely decisions. So that's the first one. And the second one, seemingly used widely in NATO and UK US forces, the key principles about underpinning decision making with uncertainty are decentralised execution. Mm-hmm. So subordinates are empowered to act without waiting for orders. Yeah. Commanders' intent. So leaders define the why, what and effect, but leave the how open. Love that one. And trust and initiatives. Soldiers are expected to exercise judgment based on the intent, even when plans fall apart. So when you're talking about Gen Z not wanting to take on leadership positions, well, sorry, people, but you have to take some level of decision making, whether you're a bloody leader or not, because that is about accountability. And that will get me onto a massive soapbox if we're not careful, so I'll just calm down and continue. So leaders are accepting that things will change, so they're trained to set direction and then adapt at every step of the way.
Yeah.
Make timely decisions with incomplete information. I remembered this one, the 80% rule. So sometimes called the good enough principle, which I love. And I remember talking so often about it, because I sort of cut it down as well because I'm rebellious, to 70%, but 70% will do. So 70%, 80%, but often it will do. And, you know, that whole concept that if you've waited for 100%, you've waited too long. Yes. So there's that balance between urgency and accuracy and making decisions that are good enough to get act on and then adjust rapidly as the picture changes. So again, that responsiveness to the situation. Two more. after action reviews, post exercise reports, whatever you want to call them, evaluation and continuous learning. We were taught how to do that right from the start. How many organisations have I been in that just go bimbling into the next fucking thing without having even thought about, let's not do that next time.
And doing exactly the same thing again and wondering why it went wrong again.
Exactly the same outcome. Well, no shit, Sherlock. So leaders are expected to review, reflect, iterate, and often in the middle of operations. You know, you're evaluating as it's actually happening. But this culture of learning that we talk about and doing that under pressure. So being very comfortable in the discomfort of not knowing, but doing something anyway. And then the last one, which brought me back to thinking about you as a chaos pixie, was that embodying calm under chaos. Because you might be that pixie, but you always look quite calm, my love. And here we go with somatics, but that physical posture, the breath control, the tone of voice are all about how we were taught. We might not have got it right all of the time, but that military presence, that leadership presence, so that in the calm you can think clearly, reduce the panic in others, and maintain that presence. Not for people to be going, I'm looking to you for all of the answers, but just to know that somebody who's holding the space, which the word was that you used earlier. But I was like, there we are, you know, all those things that whilst we were still very young while we were in the military, but I went, bloody hell, I had sort of forgotten in amidst all of this that we were being taught this in our early 20s.
Yeah.
Being taught how to
And we were being taught really well, and it may not have felt like that at the time, but I think that, you know, I think that there's also maybe a misconception often about military leadership, and it is hierarchical, but it's hierarchical to an extent. And as you said, there's still, particularly in the British military, and that isn't the case in some militaries that I've encountered, that actually there is this acceptance that there is supposed to be initiative and space and problem solving in the whole team, not just in the leadership. And one of the things that struck me from what you're saying is that in order for everyone else to be able to take the initiative and make decisions under pressure when the plans change, is that everyone has to understand what we're trying to achieve. And so that communication piece at the outset of ensuring that everyone, the objective is this, we're trying to do this. This is the current plan. Obviously, as we all know, no plan survives first contact. And that rather than everyone running around in circles because they don't know what the ultimate plan is, they still know that we're trying to take this town or whatever it is. And so if all the things go wrong, there's still a unit that can go, okay, a junior leader or someone who steps into a leadership role because they have to, who goes, okay, we're going to go this way around this side because we've found out that this route isn't going to work. So I think the communication piece is really important. I also think that there's a case to be made for leaders sometimes deliberately not knowing the answer because you've got to practice it, right? And for many people, and we talked about this in the last episode, if people have come from an environment where there is learned helplessness, or they've come from an environment where there's previously been a leader who did everything, micromanaged, they may not be used to, they haven't embodied the ability to take the initiative. And so you need to practice that. And so it kind of links in a little bit, and I'll put it in the link, but there's a really nice blog post about how new leaders can thrive without all the answers. And I don't think it applies only to leaders, the new leaders. I think there's a power to not knowing, but effectively you put yourself kind of in the position of a coach so that you listen to your team, you ask powerful questions. And I know you're doing an episode in a couple of weeks on the importance of questions and how powerful they can be, but that sort of giving feedback that's supportive but holding back from offering all the solutions. And then again, the issue of reflection. So how did this go? How could we have done this differently? What options did you come up with? And there's another article which I'll also pop in, which has 10 questions that are to do with curiosity before you rush into decision making. And so, where are we now? What's the intended outcome? What are we trying to achieve? How does this link in? And we go back into our quilt, into our weave thing. How does this link into other things that are going on? Who do we need to involve? What data do we have? What don't we have? What options are, what our values tell us to do? And I think that, again, this issue of values comes up a lot, about understanding where we need to be. And there's a huge discussion at the moment in the humanitarian context about values and about principles, and how close we have to get to sometimes looking at, are we going to have to sacrifice our values because everyone wants us to achieve something, and how does that land with us, and whether or not that is acceptable, and also what the unintended consequences for the future are trying to get a resolution now. But if we've given up our values, what happens next in the future as we erode them? And so I think there's some really interesting space that can be created by a leader deliberately, sometimes, and not always, because otherwise that would be just really tedious for everyone, but sometimes just stepping back and going, I don't know, and I'd be interested to hear what you think, even if you actually think you have the answer, because often your team will come up with something that's truly brilliant and much better than the thing that you'd already got in your head as the correct answer.
I agree with all of the above. I have a prime sort of like story to bring some of that to life. The first thing I wanted to say, though, was about this issue of intent. And never mind the fact that I would have a soapbox about evaluation, but I also have a bit of a soapbox about intent. Because if you haven't articulated that, that's when a whole load of other voices step in to say, oh, well, this is what's going on. And they make stuff up. The number of times I've been in organisation, and senior teams going, well, I'm really fucked off that this rumour has gone round, and I'm hearing back from teams that we're doing X, Y and Z. I was like, well, I'm not bloody surprised, because you haven't told them what's going on. Okay, and if you don't know what's going on, you do know what the intention is. Stop treating people like children. And again, we're back to this type of culture which is utterly parental, where they're going, oh, we can't tell them that because we haven't got all of the information, or we can't tell them that because people might leave. As people will leave anyway, treat them like adults, that we're going to be doing X, Y and Z or whatever it might be, but keep them with the intent so that they know where they're actually building from. And I think, my prime example, I was in an organisation that wanted to move 2/3 of the organisation to Birmingham from London. Now, okay, I'm not talking about like being in a massive international company. I'm talking about a company of 450. But that still meant a significant amount that weren't going to move from London to Birmingham. We were going to have to recreate teams. And that meant significant restructuring, what redundancy might look like, if you got to move that many people, what teams were you moving, and. So I was very much from the people perspective of this, as you can imagine, and we've done an episode about change and what the transition is like, and we've talked about, there's what people are actually feeling versus the actual process. But I was working with another member of the team who was much more about, here's the office space, this is what it's going to look like, bang, 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 all of the things that you could put your hands around, which you can't really from the people perspective as much. And then they wanted to run it all like a process. And I said, right, okay, we need to stop all of this. And if you want to take people on this, what you're saying, we do not have all the answers. We've got a pretty good idea what we think the blueprint is going to look like in terms of who's moving, rather than just 4 or 5 of us having to lead all of this in a vacuum, that the heads of service are brought on board with this. And it's exactly the thing that you're saying. I don't know what generation number letter that they actually sat in, but there was all of this, don't make us make the decisions. This is on you. I was like, I don't think so. Your salary decrees that you will have all sorts of ideas with this. So I didn't even ask any questions. I put the 24 of them in a room together with flip chart paper just pinned all over the wall and said, we have the instruction, this has not come from us, we have an instruction from a regulatory authority that we're moving 2/3 of the organisation to Birmingham. I am going to leave you here for 2 2.5 hours, and then I'm going to pop back in to see how you're getting on. But between you, I want to know what your suggestions and what your recommendations would be as to who moves and who stays and why. And they went, what? No, stay. I was like, I'll see you in 2 hours. And I literally just left. I would love to have had a camera or a video just to be able to watch what actually went on in that room. And I'd split them, and I also wanted to see as well. So it was a bit of an experiment for me. Sorry, people, if you know who I'm talking about, but I split them into 3 teams. You know, you had smaller groups. And when I came back in, there were those who were sat on their phone who had clearly opted out of playing at all. And yet there were those that must have thought, right, I've got a chance to influence this. Here we are, back to the weave again. I am going to stick everything up on the board. Of course, not surprisingly, there were things that we hadn't thought about when we put our blueprint together. So then I said, right, I want you to come and have a one-to-one with the chief exec and talk about your thoughts. And all 3 of them changed the chief exec's mind on particular things that they wanted doing.
Wow.
So that was in one part of the weave. And again, I was saying to them, we've got ideas, but we haven't got all the answers. And you are the ones closer to the work to know what would work and what wouldn't. And I said this to them when I came back in. I said, so why wouldn't I ask you? This wasn't us being frigging lazy because we couldn't be asked to do the work. But this is your opportunity to influence what happens next. Take it or leave it. And then I said, right, okay, now we're going to do it with staff forum. I got a lot of pushback from the leadership team then going, absolutely not, we're not having staff involved in this as well. I was like, I think you'll find that we're not having them decree who goes, but I want to talk to them about really being in the mix for this, because this is going to happen and they have a choice to make. They can attempt to influence certain things during the consultation and everything else besides. I am also equally willing to accept that they may well not want to be in the know or be part of the I don't knowing and being the voice piece to the rest of the staff, in which case they can opt out, but I'd like to have them along for the ride. So we basically had probably the most effective staff forum I have ever had in any of the organisations, because we gave them teeth. We gave them a proper voice. And again, whilst we had some idea of the things that we actually wanted, we kept quiet on a number of things and were happy to give them the response of the staff thought of this. This is the stuff that we're actually going to do. To the point that we had a significant amount of people who knew that they were going to leave because they didn't want to move from London to Birmingham, but were willing for 3-4 months to come up and train all of the new teams that we'd recruited in Birmingham.
Wow.
And that is a whole story of I don't knowing and taking everybody with and saying I don't know a lot, a real lot, and watching those human beings who went, well, why the fuck are you in a position of power then if you don't have all of the answers? Don't expect me to help you. This is your job, not mine. And those that were like, cool, I'm really happy to be in here and having a voice and actually being listened to. I have experienced quite how powerful that really is, and it is brilliant.
I'm really interested to hear what the ones who decided, who were on their phones, like who weren't engaged, were they possibly the ones who complained the most about whatever decision happened? Because
and I was just like, I would just shrug and go, you took your choice. I said, I gave you a massive opportunity and it is your responsibility that you didn't take it, not mine. So I'm not as interested to listening to your complaining about it now. Because you could have influenced this, but you chose not to. And interestingly, my version of divide and conquer was their peers were going, shut up. You didn't want to play. You don't get a say here now. They were really quite emphatic because they hadn't helped with that. So there was work to do because, of course, you didn't want to break it, because some of these people, interestingly, some of those people on their phone did decide to come with. Others were trying to stay quiet so that their jobs were retained in London, and they were. But then they were all upset when they weren't the biggest voices anymore, because, of course, the biggest cohort was in Birmingham. Again, I said, you could have been there.
Yeah.
The team could have been there.
The other thing I'm interested in is we've talked a lot about discomfort and making space for discomfort and living in discomfort. And I know that you've talked a lot about this in your journey as a coach, as a somatic coach, particularly learning to, I don't know, it's embracing, but to accept discomfort, your own discomfort and the discomfort of others. And I just wonder how much discomfort there was in that process from the different elements in terms of being given this, for some people it's they view it as an opportunity. For other people it's not how they want to be. So I just wondered about the discomfort levels that there
There was
were.
a big lot in all arenas.
A big lot.
A real big lot.
Big
Yeah.
lot.
So descriptive, isn't it? In all arenas and from all aspects and all levels. I think I've come to learn about myself, and this is a long time before I started down my somatic work and embracing it and embodying it and knowing that much more about it, that I now appreciate that whilst I haven't enjoyed it, and nobody enjoys it, do they, for God's sake? Even now, I can name it and know more about it now, but I think I might have said this in the change episode, I don't like change. So my decision was to become part and parcel of change and do organisational development, be involved in transformation projects, and whilst not always in the know, being in the mix so that I could help shape things. So I've learned along the way probably that whilst you might not want to have to do it, the easiest route through discomfort is to sit in it. And I've had to sit alongside, leaders who really don't want to do it, who don't want to be saying, I don't know. And I remember distinctly with this, we had, God knows, at least 150, 200 of the staff in the room at the same time in this place in London. And they were asking certain questions. And I could see that we were in that mode where at least two of the other executive management team were trying to answer to give certainty. And I know that when you try to do that, it unravels very quickly, or you have to change your mind. And then you start eroding trust again, because they'll go, yeah, but last time you said this, or last time you said that. And that was also from the fact that they didn't spend a good amount of time with staff forum or with the staff, where they were getting this challenge back. And I would actually be saying to them, yeah, well, when was the last time you changed your mind? I said, did you change your mind on lunch? I wasn't being facile. I was like, things change. So give us a break. We're telling you what we know for now, but don't hold me to it, because something else might come out of the woodwork. So I said, if you're asking for certainty, so I got up on stage and said, give me the mic, and said, we don't really know. If I'm being brutally honest, we don't really know. This is what I know now, but it could change in the next 2 days. But I said, if you're forcing me into a place of giving you some level of certainty, this is what I know right now. But I'm asking you not to hold me to it, because next week, it may well become clear that we ought to do something else, and we're trying to keep up with the communications to tell you as much as we actually know. But if you force us down a route of certainty, we will make bad decisions for you and us and the organisation. And I think that that's what happens far too often, is that everyone in that fixie rescuing type mode wants to rush to certainty, wants to rush to solutions, and it makes for bad decisions. I've spent my life, which is why I'm exhausted and now work for myself, being in organisations where I feel like I'm fighting the whole fucking time to get people to take their time, to do things properly, to take people with them, because it's the right thing to do and it will get you to better outcomes. But everyone wants to just fly through it, go, fuck them, we're just going to, maybe not seeing it quite like that, but we haven't got time for all of that. We just need to get to here because the board are forcing our hand to do X, Y and Z. Well, I'm sorry, board, you want things done and you want things done well, we have to take the whole organisation with us. And whilst there will always be some level of fallout, I do feel in the example that I'm giving you that it could have been so much worse. We were really intentional about all of the stuff that we were doing. And I feel the same again with how the extent that I went to with communications to teams during COVID as well. It matters. It really matters. And a lot of the time we were talking to them day in, day out, saying, still don't know, or get back on a call, the government have now told us X, now I can tell you this about what we're doing on furlough or whatever it might be. But just come with us and be in that level of discomfort. And it is excruciating, but we're back to boundaries again, because this is where I have to be really careful about my boundaries, because that takes a lot of capacity, and it does for leaders, but it's so worth it. So worth it when you get it right.
And on that lovely note,
we're finished. Oh,
we're ready to end.
Ready to end.
It's time for a quote, Bobby.
Do you know, I really wish I page numbered all the notes that I actually write, because I'm now going to have to try and find it. One moment.
That's fine.
One moment. Oh, that's because I put it over here safely so that I know where it was. It's here now.
Of course.
Here we go.
Okay.
So, the most courageous leaders aren't the ones with all the answers. They're the ones willing to stand in uncertainty, make space for others, and trust that not knowing is the beginning of wisdom.
Oh, well, that kind of sums up everything we've said, doesn't it?
Indeed.
Cool. It's almost as if you knew what we were going to say.
Yeah.
Which I know is
an absolute fallacy. Absolutely not, because I don't know is probably the thing that I say most in my life. I do like the word on one last note is I don't know yet.
Yes, I don't know yet. There you go. That's a quote from Bobby to be taken by everybody from now on. I think you should get it on a t-shirt. All right, my lovely. Then again, I was going to say I don't know when I'm going to see you next, because you've got some other guests to chat to now for a couple of weeks, haven't you?
Indeed. So they will come thick and fast, and you'll hear more about the next one in our outro.
Awesome. Well, I will see you when I see you, my lovely. Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of More Than a Lumpy Jumper. As always, all the references mentioned in today's episode are available in the notes on our website and Spotify page. Books, articles, TED Talks, lots about Sir Simon Sinek to help you dig a little deeper. Next week, we're diving into a different kind of leadership, the kind that starts at home. I'll be joined by Charlie Lyons, HR professional, coach and parent, to explore how the skills we use in parenting, negotiation, patience, creative bribery, often mirror what's needed in leadership, and vice versa. Because if you've ever parented through nap transitions, potty training, school wobblies, or God help us, teenage silences, you'll know change isn't quarterly, it's minute by minute. Just as you find your feet, it all shifts again. And somehow we keep adapting, learning and showing up. So, from bedtime routines to big strategy sessions, it's all connected. So join us then for being the parent leader.